Over the last decade, tens of thousands of women around the world were implanted with PIP breast implants, only to find years later that the manufacturer had used industrial silicone instead of medical-grade silicone. The first signs that there were a problem appeared in 2005, but it took Australian and international regulators more than 5 years to issue a recall, and that was too late for many women who had already been implanted.
The reason I had my operation was because after 2 children, I had the skin of a G cup and the filling of an A.
Well, there's 2 phases of this, of course. There are the devices that haven't been implanted, and that process started in 2010 when TGA worked with the sponsor, that brought the PRP implants into the country, who then worked with the surgeons to recall the devices so they were no longer used. The bigger issue, though, of course, was for people who had the implants, and you can't recall those implants when people already have them inside them. And so then the issue was alerting the people with the implants that there was a problem, and for them to go and see their doctor, be their GP or their surgeon.
What quickly became apparent is that the TGA had no system to communicate with these surgeons who were implanting the PIP device or the patients who were receiving them, because no one was collecting this basic information into a single database. And it meant the TGA, instead of communicating directly with surgeons and patients, they had to rely on the media to get safety messages out.
The biggest thing is having children and not knowing whether you're going to be there. That's hard.
Women waited in terrible anxiety until the TGA's test results were available. But even then, they did not fully trust the reassurances of the TGA that the industrial silicone was not the cause of a range of symptoms many of the women have been experiencing, and that the risk of reoperation in women who did not have ruptures needed to be carefully considered.
I think you come to learn that advice is seen to come from government. It's greeted with suspicion. It's sad, but that's the way it is.
You know, I'm not a medical person, and I can't say that this is going to cause cancer, but I certainly can't say that it's not going to. So you wonder, you know, where does the silicone go? They're trying to tell me that they only stay within my breasts. Well, I'm sorry, I don't believe that, and I don't think they can say that that is true until we're 4 or 5 years down the track.
We could answer these questions if we had data registries that record who gets which device and how they perform over time. It would also solve the problem of being able to communicate directly with patients when something goes wrong.
So for me, and the continued reflection on this, is how do you get to people quickly so that they then can sit with their doctor and discuss the entire situation.
What happened next was for the TGA to investigate what the actual risks were. And again, this demonstrated serious problems. The PIP implants were manufactured in France, and for several months the French authorities were reluctant to hand over any information about the testing they had conducted that led them to issuing the worldwide recall. So the TGA had to do their own testing, and that takes time. And while they were waiting, women who had the implants were left imagining the worst. It took several months for the TGA to collect batches of PIP implants that had not been pulled off the shelves prior to implant and to test those, and even longer to collect ones that had been implanted and then explanted from women who had ruptures. This process would have been much faster if the French regulator had assisted with information, and it raises issues around the safety trade-offs that come with global harmonisation. That is, letting a single country that's a party to the harmonisation do the safety and effectiveness evaluations for all countries who will put those devices into patients.
Where there has been mutual recognition, if you like, of regulatory processes, that Australia does rely on the integrity of the regulation and the pre-marketing approval and assessment by the international regulators. As a society, we don't like red tape and we don't like regulation too much. until something goes wrong, and then we want to know where was the red tape and the regulation to protect us. So if Australia was to go through a process of not having a mutual recognition system and assessing every device, that would slow down the use, the import and use of valuable devices that we need for human health.
It's also an issue of cost. The US regulator, the FDA, employs around 17,000 people. The TGA, Australia's regulator, employs around 700 people to manage around the same number of therapeutic goods, that's drugs and devices. We hate to spend money on big bureaucracies, and in health we really want the money spent at the coalface providing care for patients. But in this case, are we getting it wrong?
So it's a balancing act, and I think that's where post-market assessment and scrutiny, I think, becomes particularly important. The other issue that is important to raise in relation to medical devices is that, unlike drugs, you can't do the clinical trials that can occur with drugs, the different phases of clinical trials, double-blind trials when you use placebo drugs and so on, because if a medical device is put in, you can't pretend that it wasn't, or you couldn't ethically put in a device that just didn't work. So it's a complex area, and I think that's where the issue of follow-up and post-marketing surveillance becomes important.
At the moment in most countries, once a device is approved on the clinical trial evidence, and we've just heard that that can be less than rigorous, there is no record of who gets the device or whether it's safe and effective once it's implanted. In modern society, when so much information about us is electronically stored and linked, it seems shocking that this crucial information about our health that can assist with safety, effectiveness and cost-effectiveness evaluation in the long term isn't being collected.
The other part of all of this is having people being made aware that there was a problem. There were quite a number of people that didn't know which implant they had. But keeping their records, if you've got something inside you, you should certainly keep your records there.
And whilst we're waiting for electronic health records that can provide post-market surveillance to be developed, consumers can help by ensuring that any issues with a medical device are reported directly to the TGA.